A young woman chips away at a stone, guided by a forbidden lullaby. Lyra was a stone carver who could feel a strange energy humming within the quarry rocks, a secret sense her village dismissed as childish superstition. While others saw only raw material for building, she listened for the song her grandmother once hummed, a melody about stones that could sing. Her deliberate work on a simple granite slab was an act of quiet rebellion, a risk that threatened her place in the only home she had ever known. By the end of her story, you will understand how a single forgotten melody could unravel centuries of lost history and restore a power thought to be myth. What happens when the one person who remembers a forgotten truth decides to speak up? I am always curious to know where in the world these stories find you and what the local time is where you are listening right now. What forgotten piece of your own past might be waiting to be rediscovered? The chisel bit deep into a new seam of rock, its usual metallic ring replaced by a clear, resonant chime. A vein of quartz, previously hidden within the dull granite, shimmered under her strike. It did not just gleam, it hummed. A low, melodic thrum traveled up the tool and into Lyra's bones, a vibration that felt like a whispered answer to the song in her heart. Instinct took over. She followed the sound, her fingers tracing the vein until they found a narrow fissure, a crack in the world that seemed to breathe out the faint, ethereal music. A shadow fell over her work. Foreman Kale stood there, his face like the unyielding stone around them. "You know this is a restricted zone," he stated, his voice flat and final. He did not ask for an explanation. He simply took her chisel and hammer, the confiscation, a punishment that struck at her very identity. Without her tools, she could not work. Without work, she had no place here. As he turned away, her hand darted into the fissure, closing around a small, fallen shard of the quartz. It was warm, like a sun-washed pebble, and she slipped it into her pocket before she could be seen. The walk back to the village was the longest of her life. She could confess, apologize, and beg for her tools back. It would mean renouncing the hum, the song, the truth she felt in her very soul. Or she could remain silent, clinging to a mystery that had already cost her so much. That night, alone in her small room, the choice felt less like a decision and more like a destiny settling upon her. She would feign contrition, play the chastened worker, but she would not let this go. The warm shard in her palm was proof. It was a secret she would have to keep, even if it meant standing completely alone. Holding the quartz to the dim light of her candle, she turned it over and over. Its warmth was a constant, comforting pulse. Then, as the last candle flicker died, the shard began to glow with a soft, internal light. Lyra froze. A beam of pale luminescence projected from the stone, painting the ghost of a symbol onto her wall. It was a shape she had never seen, a complex knot of lines and curves that seemed to hold a meaning just beyond her grasp. It was a sign, a message from the stone itself, and she knew with a certainty that chilled and thrilled her that her journey had only just begun. The ghostly symbol burned in her vision long after the quartz shard's light faded. Driven by a need she could not name, Lyra snatched a piece of broken slate and a stub of charcoal. Her hand moved with a frantic energy, copying the spiraling form from memory. It was a simple, elegant rune, a coiled line that seemed to hold motion within its curves. When she was done, she stared at the drawing, her heart hammering against her ribs. Almost without thinking, she reached out and traced the symbol with her fingertip. A soft, warm light flared from the lines she had drawn. It was brief, a heartbeat of golden radiance that poured from the charcoal mark and sank into the slate itself. A faint sizzle filled the quiet room. When the light vanished, Lyra stared in disbelief. The hairline crack that had marred the slate's surface was gone, seamlessly mended as if it had never existed. Awe washed over her, so profound it stole her breath. This was real. The power in the stone was real, and she had just called it forth. But that awe was instantly chased by a spike of cold fear. The glow had been bright enough to cast her shadow sharply against the wall. Had someone seen it from another dwelling? Had that flicker of old light betrayed her already? The conflict was immediate and terrifying. The desire to understand this miracle was a physical ache, a fire in her mind, yet the risk was absolute. If Foreman Kale or the village elders discovered this, her exile would be swift and final. She was no longer just a disobedient stone carver. She was a wielder of a forbidden art. Her decision was made in that breathless moment. She could not stop. She would not, but she could not practice here, not in this room where a single slip could illuminate her guilt for all to see. She had to find a place where the light would not be seen and the sound would not be heard. She had to trust no one. This secret was hers alone to bear, a fragile, glowing truth she must protect at all costs. This first clumsy success had proven the power was not only real, but usable. It was a key that could mend stone, and who knew what else? But that very usability made her a target. Secrecy was now her most vital tool. As the first hint of dawn tinged the sky, her thoughts turned to the one place everyone in the village avoided, a place shrouded in fearful tales of collapsed ambitions and old, bad luck. The overgrown ruins at the village edge promised the isolation she desperately needed. The ancient archway groaned under the weight of its own history, its stone choked by a thick net of thorns and ivy. Lyra worked with a quiet desperation, her hands tearing at the vines until her fingers were raw. With a final, grating shudder, a section of the collapsed wall gave way, revealing a darkness that felt less like an absence and more like a presence. She stepped inside, and the feeble daylight seemed to hesitate at the threshold, as if afraid to follow. Her breath caught. The walls were not merely carved. They were written upon. Faded runes, thousands of them, spiraled from floor to ceiling in a silent, stone-bound symphony. They did not reflect the light. They consumed it, pulling the dim glow into their intricate grooves and holding it fast. The air itself felt thick with a slumbering hum, a vibration that resonated with the quartz shard burning in her pocket. Reaching out, she pressed her palm against a sequence of symbols. It was not a sound that filled her then, but a vision, flashes of light, not from torches, but from fingertips. She saw artisans moving with a fluid grace, their tools not carving stone, but guiding streams of liquid luminescence into the rock, weaving power into permanence. The understanding was a physical shock, a jolt of pure knowledge that left her dizzy. But the chamber, undisturbed for generations, reacted violently to the sudden surge of awakened energy. A deep rumble echoed through the small space, and with a roar of protesting stone, the entrance collapsed in a cloud of dust and debris, sealing her inside. Absolute blackness fell, heavy and suffocating. Panic clawed at her throat, its cold fingers tightening around her lungs. She was buried alive, yet beneath that terror, a strange and fierce exhilaration burned. She was trapped not with her doom, but with the answers. The very knowledge she had risked everything to find was now her only possible salvation. Forcing her breathing to slow, she closed her eyes, reaching for the memory of the runes she had just seen. She needed one that spoke of movement, of opening, of release. Her mind settled on a symbol that felt like a sigh, a simple, flowing mark that her newfound intuition named as breath or air. Focusing every ounce of her will, her fear, and her hope, she began to trace the rune into the thick dust covering the floor. A faint, golden light began to emanate from her finger, etching the symbol into reality. She pushed her intention into it, not with force, but with a desperate plea. She did not command the stone to move. She asked it to breathe. For a long, terrifying moment, nothing happened. Then, a subtle shift. A faint grating sound whispered from the pile of rubble blocking the exit. One of the larger stones trembled, then rolled aside with a gentle nudge of unseen energy, creating a narrow, jagged opening just wide enough for her to squeeze through. She scrambled out, gasping the cool evening air, her body trembling not just from the effort, but from the profound connection she had forged. This was no longer a curious trick. It was a dialogue, a partnership with the earth itself. But as she stood there, heart still pounding, the sound of approaching voices cut through her reverie. Foreman Kale was there, his figure silhouetted against the twilight, flanked by the stern-faced village elders. They were staring directly at the newly collapsed ruin, their expressions hardened into grim masks of suspicion. The circle of grim faces around her felt harder than any stone she had ever carved. Elder Morwen's voice was a low, chilling tremor, accusing her of recklessness, of endangering the village by tampering with ground that could collapse at any moment. They called her discovery a disturbance. They called her curiosity a threat. The decree was absolute. She was forbidden from the quarry and the ruins. Her world shrunk to the village center, under the watchful eyes of her own neighbors. Every instinct screamed to argue, to show them the mended slate in her pocket, to make them feel the hum of the quartz shard. But she saw the unyielding certainty in their eyes. They would never understand. They would only see more proof of her dangerous delusion. So she did the only thing she could. She bowed her head, her voice a quiet murmur of submission. I understand. I will obey. The lie tasted like ash, but it was a necessary shield. Inside, a new resolve crystallized, cold and sharp. If she could not go to the runes, she would have to make the runes come to her. She needed to understand the theory, the language behind the power. Her rebellion would have to be quiet, a war fought not with chisels, but with words. This led her to the one place in the village, even more forgotten than the ruins. A small, windowless building, stuffed with crumbling scrolls and ledgers, the village archive. Dust motes danced in the single sliver of light that pierced the gloom, settling on shelves that looked untouched for generations. It was a tomb of paper, and she was its only visitor. She ran a finger along a brittle leather binding, her heart sinking. Where would she even begin? The official records were useless, dry accounts of harvests and council meetings. But tucked away in a shadowy corner, buried under a stack of mundane repair logs, she found a book bound in warped wood and faded velvet. Its pages were filled not with tidy script, but with frantic, hand-drawn sketches of runes, accompanied by notes scrawled in a desperate, fading hand. This was no official history. This was someone's personal journal, a secret record of a search, much like her own. Her breath hitched. She was not the first. The journal's brittle pages crackled under her trembling fingers, each one whispering a truth the village had tried to erase. It was the record of a woman named Lyra, a stone singer from generations past. Her words described runecrafting not as a brutal act of will, but as a gentle alignment of intent. You do not command the stone, one passage read. You listen for its song, and then you add your own voice to the harmony. The runes were not carved with force, but guided into being with focused thought, a collaboration between crafter and element. This was the profound secret her grandmother's lullaby had hinted at all along. But then Lyra's blood ran cold. Lyra's later entries grew frantic, speaking of a growing fear. The village council, wary of a power they could not control, had declared the art a danger. They demanded the runes be used to fortify walls and sharpen tools, to turn a sacred dialogue into a weapon. When the crafters refused, the council moved to silence them, systematically destroying their work and branding their knowledge as forbidden superstition. The art was not forgotten, it was murdered. A hot, sharp anger flared within her, so potent it dried her throat. All her life, she had been told she was foolish, that the hum in the stones was just her imagination. Now she had proof that it was her village, her own leaders, who were living the lie. But the anger was quickly chased by a chilling paranoia. Her eyes darted to the archive's single door. If this knowledge was deliberately suppressed, then someone, somewhere, was tasked with keeping it that way. Was Foreman, Kale, merely a strict disciplinarian, or was he a guardian of this old, enforced ignorance? Did the current elders know the full history, or were they just repeating the fears of their ancestors? Anyone who knew the truth would see her not as a curious girl, but as a direct threat to the established order. She could not let this journal be found. The decision was agonizing, but clear. For hours, she pored over the delicate script, committing every rune, every principle of harmonic intent, to memory. She burned the shapes into her mind until she could see them with her eyes closed. Then, with a resolve that felt like tearing a piece of her own soul away, she took the journal to the small hearth in her dwelling. The pages caught quickly, the velvet cover curling and blackening. She watched as Lyra's voice, her struggle, and her wisdom turned to smoke and ash. It was a terrible, necessary sacrilege. In destroying this last physical link to the past, she severed her final tie to the village's approved history. She was now the sole keeper of a flame they had tried to extinguish. Her isolation was complete, but so was her purpose. Among the final, fading words she had memorized was a desperate hope, a legend Lyra believed could reverse the suppression. It spoke of a master rune, a nexus of power known as the Heartstone, a key that could awaken all other runes, and it was rumored to lie hidden, waiting in the treacherous, flooded passages of the Sunken caves. The silence of the archives was broken by a soft rustle behind her. Lyra spun around, her heart leaping into her throat. Finn, the archivist's apprentice, stood there, his usual placid expression replaced by one of sharp focus. He had been watching me, he said quietly, not with accusation, but with a kind of shared urgency. He had seen the specific, forbidden texts she had disturbed, the dust patterns she had altered. For a moment, Lyra was frozen, her mind racing through a dozen desperate lies. But then Finn did something unexpected. He reached into his own tunic and pulled out a small, smooth river stone. It was unremarkable, but as he held it, a faint, familiar warmth seemed to emanate from his palm. "My great-grandmother called them listening stones," he whispered. She said they held the memory of water. He was not a guard of the old lies. He was a fellow seeker, hiding in plain sight. The relief that washed over her was so potent, it felt like a physical blow, yet it was instantly tempered by a sharp, cold spike of fear. Trust was a luxury she could not afford. A single word from him to Foreman Kale or the elders would end everything. But the sheer impossibility of finding another person who understood, who felt the same hum in the world, was a temptation she could not resist. Her secret was a crushing weight, and the chance to share just a small part of it was an unbearable relief. She studied his face, searching for any flicker of deception in his earnest eyes. The risk was monumental, but the potential reward was everything. Taking a deep, steadying breath, she made her choice. She slowly opened her own hand, revealing the quartz shard. It pulsed with a soft, golden light in the dimness, a silent testament to the truth she carried. His eyes widened, not in fear, but in wonder. In that shared glow, a pact was sealed without a single word. Their partnership was born, a fragile alliance built on a foundation of mutual secret. With Finn as her ally, the world of hidden knowledge cracked open. He knew the archives like the back of his hand, guiding her to texts she would have never found, obscure geology surveys and forgotten travelogues kept in a hidden cabinet. Their combined efforts quickly bore fruit. One evening, hunched over a brittle, oversized book of regional rock formations, they found it. It was not labeled as a map to the Heartstone, of course. To any other eye, it was just a detailed cross-section of the local cliffs and waterways. But Finn noticed a series of tiny, almost imperceptible symbols etched alongside a particular network of underwater tunnels, the Sunken caves. They were the same runes Lyra's journal had described, markers for safe passage and hidden chambers. The path was no longer just a rumor in a burned book. It was a real, tangible route, and it was laid out right in front of them. The map was a ghost on the page, but the path it described was terrifyingly real. 2 nights later, under the bruised purple sky of dusk, Lyra and Finn stood at the edge of a cliff, staring down at a jagged fissure where the river poured into the earth. The entrance to the Sunken caves was a gaping maw, half submerged in churning, dark water. Guarding it were 2 ancient pillars of slick, black stone, their surfaces scarred with deep, weathered runes. As Lyra took a hesitant step closer, the runes on the nearest pillar flared to life with a soft, blue-white light. A low hum vibrated through the soles of her boots, and with a great, groaning sigh, the water level at the entrance began to drop. It pulled back like a receding tide, revealing a slimy, stone staircase that descended into the darkness below, but the light from the pillar did more than just part the waters. It pulsed through the river, a beacon in the gloom, and from the Inkai depths, answering lights began to swirl. Dozens of sinuous, blue-green forms emerged, their bodies glowing with an eerie, internal radiance. They were eels, their long bodies coiling just beneath the surface, their needle-like teeth visible as they swarmed the newly revealed entrance, drawn to the energy. The water would not stay back for long. They had only moments. Finn pointed a trembling finger at the eels, his face pale. "We cannot get through that." But Alara's mind was already racing, her fingers closing around a loose stone. She focused, pouring her will into the simple rune for light she had practiced in secret. She did not carve it. She imagined it, her intent flowing from her palm into the rock. It began to glow, not with the cool blue of the pillar, but with a warm, golden light. With a quick, underhand toss, she sent the stone skittering far to the left, where it clattered against the cliff wall. The swarm of eels turned as one, their collective bioluminescence flowing toward the new, fascinating source of energy. "Go now," Alara whispered, her voice tight. Finn did not hesitate. He scrambled down the wet stairs, slipping once before righting himself and vanishing into the dark opening. Lyra took one last look at the glowing pillar, feeling its hum begin to falter. The water was already starting to creep back up the steps. She plunged in after Finn, the cold water soaking her legs as she dashed into the tunnel, just as the river crashed back into place behind her, sealing them in. The air in the tunnel was cold and heavy, smelling of wet stone and ancient stillness. They moved in a breathless silence, the only light coming from the faint, residual glow of Alara's fingertips. The narrow passage soon opened up, and they both stopped, their gasps echoing in the immense space. They stood at the edge of a vast, subterranean cavern. It was not dark. The walls, the ceiling, the very floor were covered in runes, but these were not like the faded, damaged symbols in the ruins. These runes were pristine, carved with impossible precision, and each one pulsed with a soft, steady, multicolored light. Reds, blues, greens, and golds rippled across the stone in a slow, silent rhythm, like the breathing of a slumbering giant. It was a library of light, a cathedral of forgotten power, and at its center, the air itself seemed to thrum with a silent, waiting song. The Symphony of Light began at her first step into the cavern. A single rune on the wall, ahead pulsed with a gentle, golden glow, its light flowing seamlessly to the next, and the next, creating a wave of radiance that moved with her. The rhythm was not random. It matched the steady, accelerating beat of her own heart, a deep thrumming that resonated not in her ears, but in her bones. Each pulse of light released a soft, melodic tone until the entire chamber was filled with a harmonious, breathing song. It was a greeting, an acknowledgement. The runes were not just inert symbols. They were a living, responsive memory of the craft itself, and they were testing her. Finn stayed close to the entrance, his eyes wide with a mixture of awe and frustration. "I do not hear anything," he whispered, his voice tight. "It is just light. It is a puzzle." He pointed toward the center of the chamber, where a stone plinth stood bathed in a concentrated, swirling vortex of colored light. "We should try to activate that. Maybe it is the key." He took a step forward, his hand outstretched as if to touch the central column, his mind seeing a mechanism to be solved. "No," Lyra said, her voice soft but firm, her own hand gently catching his arm. "You cannot force this. It is not a lock to be picked. It is a conversation. You have to listen." She closed her eyes, letting the visual symphony wash over her, feeling the intent behind it. The runes were not blocking their path. They were guiding it, their sequential illumination, creating a clear, winding path toward a solid wall on the far side of the cavern. They are showing us the way. We just have to follow the music. The divide between them was suddenly as vast as the cavern itself. Finn saw a problem of logic, a system to be deciphered and controlled. Lyra felt a living entity, a presence that demanded patience and respect. His impatience was a palpable force, a desire to do something in the face of this overwhelming mystery. Her stillness was an act of profound understanding. In that moment, the spiritual stakes of their quest were laid bare. This was not about finding an object. It was about proving themselves worthy of a legacy that was very much alive, a sentient art that had been waiting, sleeping, for someone who remembered how to listen. Lyra turned from him and began to walk the path of light, her steps slow and deliberate. She did not look at the final wall, but trusted the flow of the runes, her entire being focused on the harmonic song. As she approached the solid stone, the final sequence of symbols blazed with such intensity that the very air shimmered. With a sound like a deep, resonant sigh, the wall parted. A seamless section of rock slid silently sideways, revealing not a rough tunnel, but a perfectly formed archway. Beyond it lay a smaller chamber, its air utterly still, and its walls glowing with a soft, unwavering, pearlescent light. The alcove was pristine, untouched by time, and at its center, resting on a simple pedestal of pure white quartz, was a single, perfectly spherical stone that seemed to contain a miniature galaxy of swirling, golden light. The Heartstone hovered above its pedestal, a sphere of impossibly clear crystal. Inside, a single, breathtakingly complex rune floated, its golden light swirling like a captured nebula. It was the source of the song, the nexus of all the power humming through the caverns. Lyra's hand moved as if drawn by a magnet, her fingers stretching toward its serene surface. She did not want to possess it. She wanted to join it, but an inch from its cool surface, the air hardened into an invisible wall. The light within the Heartstone flashed, and the alcove vanished, replaced by a crushing wave of her own terror. She was a child again, watching her grandmother's eyes lose their spark, the old woman's final, unfinished lullaby a ghost on her lips. The failure was a physical weight, a certainty that she had not listened well enough, that she had let the song die. The vision shifted. She stood in the village square, but it was empty. Every door was shut, every window dark. Foreman Kale and the elders pointed at her, their faces carved from stone, their silent judgment a verdict of permanent exile. Then came the worst illusion of all. The runes themselves began to fade, their light guttering out like dying stars, the stone returning to mute, lifeless rock. The art was not just lost, it was erased from the world, and it was her fault. Her first instinct was to fight, to push against the psychic assault with all her will. But the fear only tightened its grip, threatening to shatter her resolve. Then, Lyra's words from the burned journal echoed in her mind. You do not command. You collaborate. This was not a physical barrier to break. It was a question, and she had to answer it with her whole being. She stopped resisting. She let the visions of failure and exile wash over her, acknowledging their pain, but refusing to be defined by them. She looked directly at the fading runes and spoke, her voice a clear, steady note in the cacophony of her fear. I do not want your power, she said. I want to hear your song. I want to protect it, so it is never forgotten again. I am here to return the balance you were meant to hold. The words were not a spell. They were a confession of her truest intent. As she spoke them, the illusions fractured like glass. The vision of her dying grandmother softened into a memory of a warm embrace. The silent, accusing village faded. The dying runes blazed back to life, brighter than before. The invisible ward dissipated with a soft, sighing release. Her hand, no longer blocked, closed around the Heartstone. It was not cold, like ordinary crystal. It was living warmth, a steady pulse that synced instantly with the rhythm of her own heart. A wave of pure, harmonious knowledge flowed into her, not as stolen secrets, but as remembered truths. She understood the full scope of the craft, not as a user, but as a custodian. The bond was instantaneous and absolute, and as her fingers tightened around the sphere, a deep, resonant hum awakened in the very bedrock beneath her feet. It was a note so profound it vibrated up through the stone, through the water, and into the very air, a seismic shift in the world's energy that rippled outward, reaching far beyond the sunken caves. The deep hum from the Heartstone did not fade. It traveled. On the ridge overlooking the village, Lyra felt the vibration shift from her hand into the earth itself, a ripple of power racing through the bedrock toward the place it all began. Below, in the quarry, the first stone began to sing. It was a small, discarded piece of granite, and it glowed with a soft, amber light, emitting a clear, single note that hung in the air like a struck bell. Then another stone answered, and another, until the entire quarry floor was a symphony of light and sound. The air itself seemed to shimmer, charged with a harmony that was both beautiful and terrifying. Workers dropped their tools, their faces a mixture of awe and pure panic. This was not a secret hum felt by one girl. This was a public miracle, an undeniable truth shining for all to see. The controlled world of the village fractured in an instant. Shouts of wonder mixed with cries of alarm, creating a chaotic chorus against the quarry's newfound song. Elder Morwen's voice cut through the noise, sharp with fear. She pointed a trembling finger toward the ridge where Lyra and Finn stood silhouetted. She has unleashed this. She has broken the old peace. Contain her. Now, the village guard, usually tasked with mending fences and settling disputes, now formed a grim line, their simple tools held like weapons. Fear had given the order, and the hunt began. Lyra watched the scene below, her heart hammering. The power she had awakened was not violent, but it was immense, and the village's fear could turn it into a catastrophe. "We have to go down there," she whispered, her voice tight. "We have to show them. They are not ready to be shown," Finn argued, his eyes wide with alarm. "They will lock you away, or worse," but Lyra was already moving, her path clear. This was no longer about hiding. The energy was loose, a river of potential that needed a channel, a guide. If left to its own devices, it would either fade back into silence or be met with such violent resistance that it might shatter. They had to reach the center of the phenomenon, to the very stones that were singing, and demonstrate the intent behind the power. As they scrambled down the rocky path, a flash of movement caught her eye. Foreman Kale was not falling in with the guards. He broke away from the group, his powerful form moving with a strange purpose. He was not heading toward the chaotic quarry, but away from it, his strides long and determined as he made for the overgrown ruins, and the look on his face was not one of anger, but of grim, resolute recognition. Foreman Kale was waiting for her inside the ruins, his large frame silhouetted against the faint, residual glow of the runes. He did not look like a man about to make an arrest. His hands were empty, and the stern mask he always wore had finally cracked, revealing an expression of profound, weary relief. Lyra froze, her heart in her throat, bracing for his condemnation. Instead, his voice was low and thick, with an emotion she had never heard from him before. It was grief. "My grandfather was the last of them," he said, the words hanging in the ancient air. "The last rune crafter. I tend the embers he left behind." The confession was a seismic shock, rearranging her entire understanding of the world. The man who had confiscated her tools, who had enforced the ban with such iron resolve, had not been her jailer. He had been a guardian, standing watch over a fragile, sleeping truth, using the guise of a stern enforcer to protect it from a village still ruled by fear. The anger she had carried for so long evaporated, leaving behind a hollow, bewildered ache. All this time, she thought she was alone, a rebel fighting the system. Now she saw that the system itself had been secretly, silently, on her side. But could she trust him? His deception had been masterful, spanning years. He had watched her struggle, had taken her tools, had let her believe she was an outcast. Every instinct screamed to question his motives, to see this as just another, more elaborate trap. Yet the raw honesty in his eyes, the way his shoulders slumped, as if a great weight had finally been lifted, felt more real than any of the village elders' pronouncements. He had not come to stop her, he had come to help. Her decision was not a choice, but a surrender to a truth deeper than her fear. "I need to learn," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I can feel the power, but I do not know how to guide it." Kale gave a slow, solemn nod. "Intuition lit the flame," he replied. "Discipline will keep it from burning down the forest." Come, with him as their guide, their small rebellion transformed. The three of them, Lyra, Finn, and the Foreman they had all feared, became an unlikely triumvirate, a secret circle dedicated to one impossible task. Their chances of successfully calming the quarry and teaching the village had just multiplied 100-fold, but the risk had grown just as large. If the council discovered that their own Foreman was the heart of the conspiracy, the backlash would be swift, absolute, and merciless. Kale led them away from the main path to his own small, unassuming dwelling on the village edge. He moved a heavy rug and a section of the floorboards, revealing a hidden trapdoor. A ladder descended into a space that took Lyra's breath away. It was a master's workshop, preserved in perfect, dustless order. Shelves held chisels of polished bone and copper, their edges gleaming. Half-finished rune stones sat on workbenches, their partially carved lines seeming to breathe in the soft light, and on the walls were detailed diagrams, showing the flow of energy, the grammar of a language she had only just begun to babble. This was not a forgotten ruin. It was a living library of the craft, a sanctuary that had been waiting for her all along. The polished bone chisel felt like an extension of her own hand, its edge humming with a resonance that the crude iron tools from the quarry never possessed. Kale guided her grip, his voice a low, steady drone as he demonstrated the true technique. It was not about cutting into the stone, he explained, but tracing the path of its own internal energy, following the grain with a gentle, unwavering pressure. As he worked, he hummed a specific, resonant frequency, a note that seemed to vibrate in harmony with the stone itself. His intent to mend flowed from his mind, down his arm, through the chisel, and into the rock, where a hairline crack sealed itself with a soft, golden sigh. This was the collaboration Lyra's journal described, the perfect union of will, sound, and material. For her first true lesson, Kale gave her a simple, dry seed and a small, smooth river stone. Your intent must be as clear as spring water, he instructed, not to force, but to encourage. Focus on the potential for life already sleeping within it. Lyra closed her eyes, her fingers tracing the rune for growth onto the stone's surface. She did not carve it with force. She invited it into being, her own quiet hum matching the vibration of the chisel. As the final line was completed, a warm green light blossomed from the rune and washed over the seed. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, a pale green shoot pushed from the husk, unfurling into a stem, then leaves, then a sturdy, healthy sapling, all in the span of a single, breathless minute. It was a miracle of controlled, beautiful power, a stark contrast to the chaotic symphony in the quarry. Finn, who had been watching with a skeptic's folded arms, slowly knelt, his hand hovering just above the vibrant green leaves. "I have never seen anything like that," he whispered, his voice filled with a reverence that erased his earlier doubts. "But that is exactly what will terrify them. A stone singing is one thing. This is life itself bending to a will. It is too close to the old stories of witchcraft. The council will see it as proof that we are tampering with the natural order." His fear was a necessary anchor in their moment of triumph. Lyra looked from the thriving sapling to Kale's grim face, and she knew Finn was right. A public demonstration of pure power, no matter how positive, could be twisted into a threat. Their first act had to be undeniable in its benefit, an act of healing so profound it would be harder to fear than to embrace. "We will not show them how to make a tree grow in a minute," Lyra decided, her voice firm. "We will show them how to mend the broken foundation of the old well, how to make the barren field fertile again. We will win their hearts by healing their home." The plan was set, a dangerous gambit to redeem the art through service. But as they huddled over a map of the village center, their strategy was shattered by a distant, clanging sound that cut through the quiet workshop. It was the village alarm bell, ringing with a frantic, urgent rhythm they had only heard in drills. The council's guards were not waiting for a demonstration. They were searching house to house, and the foreman's home was next on the list. The heavy oak door shuddered under the first coordinated blow. Outside, a dozen guards had surrounded the foreman's home, their faces set in grim masks of duty. Elder Morwen's voice cut through the splintering wood, sharp and cold as flint. She did not shout at Lyra, but to the entire village, her words a public indictment. "You think this is a gift? This power shattered continents in the ancient days. It drowned cities and salted fields. We built this village on the ashes of that chaos, and you would hand the torch back to a child." Her speech painted RuneCrafting not as a lost art, but as a primordial plague, a force of pure disorder that their ancestors had barely survived. Every word was designed to turn fear into fury. Inside the workshop, the air was thick with panic. Finn braced his shoulder against the door, his eyes wide. They are not here to talk, he gasped as another impact shook the frame. Kale stood beside the anvil, his hands clenched. We can hold them for a moment, maybe two. Then it comes to force. He looked at Lyra, his meaning clear. The defensive runes on the walls could be activated, creating a barrier of hardened air that would seal them in safety, but it would also seal their fate. To raise a shield against their own people would be to prove Morwen right, to brand themselves as dangerous separatists wielding a weapon. Surrender felt like a slower, more certain death for the craft, a return to silent, supervised oblivion. Lyra's fingers closed around the warm sphere of the Heartstone, the chaos of the quarry, the fear in Morwen's voice, the immediate threat of violence. It all demanded a reaction. But a deeper truth resonated within her, the core lesson from the Sunken cavern. This was not a battle to be won. It was a misunderstanding to be healed. A third path, terrifying and fragile, crystallized in her mind. She would not fight them, and she would not surrender to them. She would speak to them. I am going to show them, she said, her voice unnervingly calm amid the crashing door. I am going to show everyone. She placed the Heartstone on the workshop's central anvil. It was not a weapon to be aimed, but a lens to focus her intent, a conduit to project the truth she carried. This was the ultimate gamble, a wager placed on the innate goodness of the neighbors now trying to break down her door. If their fear was stronger than their capacity for wonder, she would be sealing her own prison cell. But if even one of them could see what she saw, feel what she felt, then the art had a chance. As her palms settled on the cool quartz of the anvil, the runes carved into the workshop walls flared to life. A wave of golden light poured from the Heartstone, passing through the workshop walls as if they were mist. It did not strike the villagers with force, but settled over them like a gentle dawn, and in that moment, every single person saw. A master runecrafter laid hands upon a cracked foundation, her hum a low, soothing melody as the stone knit itself back together, stronger than before. Another stood in a blighted field, tracing symbols into the earth, and watched as the soil darkened with renewed fertility, green shoots pushing toward the sun. They saw artisans not of war, but of creation, weaving light into public fountains that danced with color and shaping communal hearths that burned with a clean, eternal warmth. It was a shared memory of harmony, a history of the craft as a sacred stewardship. The battering ram fell from the guards' slackened hands, their faces transformed from aggression to bewildered wonder. All around them, villagers emerged from their homes, their earlier anger dissolving into a collective, breathless awe. They were not being shown a weapon. They were being shown their own forgotten heritage. Elder Morwen stood isolated, her face a rigid mask of denial. "Do not believe these pretty lies," she shouted, her voice strained and desperate. "It is a trick to lower your guard," but her words were lost, swallowed by the murmurs of the crowd. "I remember my grand at telling stories like that," one woman whispered. "The old songs, they mentioned stones that could heal," another man said, his voice thick with emotion. The shared vision had bypassed argument and spoken directly to their spirits, awakening a recognition deeper than fear. Seeing the shift, Lyra knew this was the only chance she would ever get. She pushed the broken door open and stepped into the open, her hands held empty at her sides. The crowd fell silent, every eye upon her. "You do not have to believe my words," she said, her voice carrying clearly in the sudden quiet. "But will you believe your own eyes? Come and see." She turned and began to walk toward the heart of the village, toward the public square and its long, dry central well. It was a tremendous risk. The crowd's sympathy was a delicate, newborn thing, a bubble that a single moment of failure or perceived threat could pop. They parted before her, a sea of uncertain faces, their expressions a mixture of hope, suspicion, and a desperate need to believe. Every step she took was a test, and the true demonstration had not even begun. The weeping spire stood in the center of the square, a tall, pale obelisk marred by a single, jagged crack running from its peak down to the middle. Every child knew the story. The crack had appeared on the very day the last runecrafter was exiled, and ever since, the village's luck had slowly bled away, as if the stone itself were weeping for their loss. Now, all eyes followed Lyra as she walked toward it, the Heartstone, a miniature sun in her palm. The crowd's hopeful murmurs were a fragile thing, a thread of trust she could feel straining with every step she took. This was not a quiet experiment in a hidden cave. It was the most public test imaginable, and if she failed here, the art would be buried again, this time forever. She could simply mend the crack. It would be the safest choice, a straightforward act of restoration that would prove the craft's utility. But as her fingers brushed the cold, broken stone, she felt the truth of it. The village did not just need a physical repair, it needed a new beginning. The intent had to be as grand as the hope she saw flickering in the faces around her. She would not just fix the past, she would build a better future with it. Pulling a slender chisel of polished bone from her belt, she ignored the fissure entirely. Instead, she knelt at the base of the spire and began to carve a new rune, one she had never seen in any book, but that felt right in her soul. A complex, interwoven symbol for unity and enduring prosperity. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. This was not what they expected. Elder Morwen, who had been watching with stony silence, took a sharp step forward, her lips pressed into a thin, disapproving line. This was no longer a simple act of mending. It was an alteration, a change to their most sacred monument. The air grew so thick with tension, you could almost carve it. In this single, deliberate act, Lyra was defining runecrafting for a generation. Would it be seen as a respectful restoration of what was lost, or as a dangerous, arrogant tampering with tradition? The future of the craft hung on the meaning the villagers would assign to the light about to bloom from her chisel. As she began to carve, a profound hush fell over the square. The only sound was the clear, resonant chime of the bone tool, tracing a path through the ancient stone. Even Elder Morwen went still, her critical gaze locked on Lyra's moving hands, her own breath held. Every person present understood they were not just watching a girl carve a symbol. They were witnessing the rebirth of their world, waiting to see if it would be a blessing or a curse. The bone chisel sang as it moved, its rhythm perfectly matched to the old lullaby she hummed beneath her breath. It was the same melody her grandmother had whispered, the one that spoke of stones that could sing. With each precise stroke, the Heartstone in her other palm pulsed, and a stream of liquid, golden light flowed from it, pouring into the freshly carved lines of the rune. The jagged crack in the weeping spire sealed itself with a soft, sighing sound, the stone knitting together until no trace of the scar remained. Then, the entire obelisk began to glow with a gentle, warm luminescence, and a soft, comforting hum emanated from it, washing over the silent square like a tangible blanket of peace. For one long, breathless moment, that was all. The light shone, the hum persisted, but the world remained otherwise unchanged. The crowd's collective awe began to waver, and she could see the doubt creeping back into their eyes. Was this it? A simple light and a pleasant sound? Elder Morwen's stern expression started to harden back into its familiar lines of disapproval. The fragile trust was evaporating, and with it, any chance for the art's return. Lyra knew that the physical act was only half of the craft. The rune was a vessel, but it required a soul. She placed her bare hand flat against the newly glowing symbol, closed her eyes, and did the most dangerous thing she had ever done. She opened her heart completely. She poured into the stone her hope for a united village, her vision of fertile fields and mended bonds, her deepest wish for a future where no one would ever have to hide their true nature again. It was an act of pure, unguarded intent, a final, desperate offering of faith. The fate of RuneCrafting hung on this single, silent exchange. Would the stone accept her hope, or would it remain merely a beautiful, silent monument? The answer was immediate and overwhelming. The light from the spire intensified from a gentle glow into a brilliant, sun-warm radiance that did not hurt the eyes. At the same moment, the ground beneath their feet began to thrum, not with a frightening tremor, but with a profound, deep-seated vitality, as if the very earth had taken a long, deep breath and awakened. A carpet of emerald green unfurled from the base of the spire, flowing over the worn gray cobblestones like a living tide. Flowers of every conceivable color burst from the seams between stones, their petals unfurling in a silent, breathtaking explosion of life. The air, once thick with tension, was now saturated with a sweet, heady fragrance that made the heart ache with its purity. The stark, utilitarian square was gone, replaced in an instant by a place of impossible beauty and profound peace. The villagers' collective gasp melted into sounds of disbelieving laughter and tears of unbridled joy. Children tumbled into the soft grass, their hands filled with blossoms, while elders reached out with trembling fingers to touch the vibrant petals, their weary faces transformed by wonder. In the midst of this sudden paradise, Elder Morwen stood frozen, her stern mask of authority, carved by decades of fearful vigilance, finally shattered. Her jaw went slack, and the rigid line of her shoulders slumped as she witnessed not the chaos she had prophesied, but a miracle of pure, benevolent creation. The foundations of her lifelong beliefs crumbled into dust, leaving behind only the raw, undeniable truth blooming at her feet. She took a hesitant step, then another, her eyes fixed on a single, perfect blue flower that had sprung up before her. The woman who had demanded containment now slowly, reverently, knelt in the soft grass. Her hand, which had so often been raised in prohibition, reached out and gently cupped the blossom. It was a silent surrender, an act of acceptance more powerful than any shouted decree. The village's heart was irrevocably won. The lost art was no longer a whispered threat from the past, but a celebrated gift for their future, a tangible promise of renewal. As the celebration swelled around her, with neighbors embracing and voices raised in happy chatter, Lyra felt a profound warmth spread through her chest. She looked down at the Heartstone in her palm, Its swirling, golden light had softened to a gentle, steady gleam, like a contented ember. The great hum that had filled her being since the sunken caves had quieted to a peaceful, resonant stillness. Its purpose here was fulfilled. It had not been drained, but had completed its work, transferring its knowledge and its power back into the world, where it now lived not in a single stone, but in the very soil and soul of the village. The stones of the quarry no longer sang on their own, but now answered to the gentle hum of a dozen new voices. In the days that followed the transformation of the square, the very place where Lyra had once worked in secret isolation became an open school, its high walls echoing with the sounds of focused instruction and the clear, resonant chime of bone chisels. Under the guidance of Lyra, Kale, and Finn, the first apprentices learned to listen to the granite, to feel for the latent song within the rock before they ever thought to carve a line. The air, once thick with dust and the grim silence of labor, now shimmered with a palpable energy of discovery. Raw stone blocks were no longer just measured for buildings, but for their potential to hold runes of gentle warmth for a home, soft light for a path, or steady strength for a bridge. The quarry had been reborn, not as a place of extraction, but as a wellspring of communal creativity. Yet, this flourishing was shadowed by a profound and sobering responsibility. The initial wave of enthusiasm was quickly tempered by the chilling memory of Elder Morwen's warnings, the ghost of a past where this same power had been feared into extinction. They were not just teaching a skill, they were curating a force that could, if misdirected, unravel the very peace they had just won. The need for a guiding principle, a shared ethical code, became their most urgent lesson. During one of these foundational discussions, as apprentices debated potential uses, Lyra stood and addressed the gathered circle, her voice quiet but unwavering. The first rule, she stated, must be that our craft serves the community and the land. It is a gift we hold in trust, never a tool for personal power or wealth. This was not a suggestion, but the non-negotiable cornerstone upon which their entire future would be built. Every choice they made now, from the simplest practice rune to the most ambitious project, was a precedent in the making. They were actively shaping the legacy of RuneCrafting, and the weight of that knowledge settled on their shoulders like a physical mantle. A single moment of arrogance or greed from one crafter could poison the well for all, turning the village's hard-won acceptance back into fear. To cement this new covenant of service, they decided their first major undertaking as a school would be a communal one. The coming winter promised to be severe, and the village's old windbreaks were crumbling. Their project would be a collaborative rune wall along the northern edge, a permanent shield woven from stone and shared intent, a testament to the art's true purpose, protection and care. The quarry's high walls now cradled a different kind of sound, the murmur of a dozen villagers sitting in a wide circle, each holding a simple river stone. Lyra moved among them, her voice calm and steady. Your first task is not to carve, but to listen. Feel for the quiet hum within it, the memory of the river that shaped it. Close your eyes, let your breathing slow. Meet the stone as you would a new friend. For a long moment, there was only the sound of the wind and focused concentration. Then, a sharp crack shattered the quiet. A young man named Bren, his face flushed with impatience, stared in horror at the stone in his lap. It had split cleanly in two. He had tried to impose a rune for heat onto the unyielding rock, forcing his will upon it rather than seeking its cooperation. The failure hung in the air, a cold wave of doubt washing over the circle. This was the fear Elder Morwen had spoken of, given form, one mistake, and the stone itself rebelled. Lyra did not scold him. She knelt, gathering the two broken halves. She held them up for all to see. "This fracture is not a sign of weakness in the craft," she said, her gaze sweeping over their worried faces. "It is a lesson in its true nature. We are not masters here. We are partners. A forced rune is a violation, and the stone will always tell you so." She placed the pieces on a soft cloth and took up her bone chisel. Her movements were not to mend, but to gently, lovingly, trace over the jagged lines of the failed symbol, her intent focused on release, on apology. A soft silver light followed her tool, and the fractured rune dissolved like mist, leaving the two stone halves whole again, though now separate. "We must always be willing to undo our mistakes," she explained, her voice soft but firm. "To honor the material we work with, this is the first step toward true skill." Bren watched, his initial shame transforming into a sober understanding. The school's entire future depended on these moments, on proving that this power was built on a foundation of respect, not control. Later that afternoon, under the warm sun, Lyra knelt beside him as he tried again with a new stone. She placed her hand over his, not to guide his chisel, but to steady his breathing. "Do not tell it to be warm," she whispered. "Ask it to remember the sun." This time, Bren's movements were slow, deliberate. He traced the simple rune with a gentle touch, his focus on an image of sunlight rather than a demand for heat. A soft, rosy glow emanated from the lines, and the stone in his palm began to radiate a gentle, comforting warmth, like a pebble left in a summer meadow. His face broke into a beam of pure, unadulterated pride, not in his power, but in the successful collaboration. Around the circle, others began to have their own small successes, a faint gleam of light, a subtle strengthening of the rock in their hands. The air itself seemed to sigh with contentment, the quarry walls humming a quiet, approving bass note to their fledgling harmony. The gentle hum of the quarry school faltered as a shadow fell across its entrance. Elder Morwen stood there, her face a landscape of deep conflict, her arms straining under the weight of a heavy, iron-bound chest. All work ceased. The air grew thick with a silence more profound than any sound, charged with the memory of her accusations and the recent miracle that had silenced them. She did not speak to the group, but her eyes found Lyra. With a heavy, resonant thud, she set the chest on a flat stone, the sound echoing like a final verdict. From a chain around her neck, she produced a single, tarnished key. The lock turned with a sharp, metallic click that seemed to unlock a century of silence. Inside, nestled on faded velvet, lay not gold or jewels, but a treasure far more precious. There were fragments of runestones, their edges worn smooth by time, their carved lines still faintly shimmering with trapped light. Beside them lay tools of polished copper and obsidian, their forms elegant and strange, so different from the quarry's blunt iron. This was the proof of the Purge, the physical evidence of a heritage systematically stolen and hidden away. My family, for 3 generations, was tasked with guarding this chest, Morwen said, her voice raspy with a grief held too long. We were told it was to protect the village from its own past. I see now we were only protecting our own fear. This confession was her public atonement, and it landed with the weight of the stones around them. A young woman named Lyra, named for the journal's author, glared at the elder, her arms crossed tightly. And how do we know this is not another trick? How can we trust the keeper of our prison? The skepticism was a cold splash of reality, a reminder that forgiveness could not be demanded, only earned. Lyra watched the painful exchange, understanding that a simple thank you would not be enough to bridge this chasm. She stepped forward, placing a hand gently on a fragmented rune stone. It pulsed with a soft, welcoming warmth at her touch. "We cannot change the past," Lyra said, her gaze including both Morwen and the skeptical apprentices. "But we can choose what we build with its pieces. Your knowledge of our village stories, Elder Morwen, is as vital as these stones. We need a historian. Someone to help us understand the context of these runes, to remember the mistakes so we do not repeat them. Will you help us?" The offer was a profound act of grace, transforming Morwen from a penitent supplicant into a needed elder once more. It healed the community's oldest wound, not by erasing history, but by integrating it. As the chest was carefully emptied, its contents laid out for study, Finn sifted through the smaller fragments at the bottom. His fingers brushed against a piece of treated leather, unusually supple. He unrolled it carefully, revealing not a rune, but a map. It was a chart of the surrounding valleys, and on it, 3 distant villages were marked not with simple dots, but with the same intricate rune for sanctuary that glowed on their own spire. His breath caught. "We are not the only ones," he whispered, the words cutting through the murmurs of discovery. "The map suggests others may have preserved the art, or at least its memory." The world, which had for so long felt small and confined, suddenly yawned wide open, filled with the thrilling possibility of lost kin and shared knowledge waiting just beyond the horizon. The arrival of the stranger was as subtle as a shift in the quarry's hum. He stood at the edge of the transformed square, his travel-stained cloak and the weary set of his shoulders speaking of a long, difficult journey. In his hand, he held not a weapon, but a plea, a simple amulet of gray slate, its surface carved with a rune for warmth that flickered like a guttering candle. "I am called Reese," he said, his voice rough from the mountain air. "I come from a village high in the peaks, where a rune like this one has kept our sacred spring from freezing for generations. But its light is failing. We felt a new song in the stone, a great hum from your valley, and we knew we were not alone." The proof he offered was both a wonder and a profound shock. Lyra took the amulet, feeling its fading pulse against her palm. The rune was familiar in its purpose, yet its style was utterly foreign, its lines sharper, more angular than their own flowing scripts. This was not a relic from a forgotten past. It was a living tradition, one that had survived in isolation, and its bearer had crossed mountains to find them. The school's hard-won peace shattered in an instant, replaced by a dizzying new reality. They were not the only keepers of the flame. The world was suddenly, terrifyingly, much larger. A heated debate erupted among the new apprentices. Some saw only hope, a chance to learn and share. Others, their memories of the council's fear still fresh, saw only risk. What if their ways are different? What if they see our craft as a threat? What conflicts might we bring back with us? The safety of their secluded rebirth felt fragile, a delicate seedling that a harsh wind from the outside world could easily crush. Lyra, Kale, and Finn withdrew to consider the choice. This was not about a single spring. It was about the very soul of the reborn art. Would they hoard their knowledge, building a perfect, isolated garden that could never spread its seeds? Or would they embrace the messy, unpredictable work of connection, trusting that the craft was strong enough to survive different hands and different hearts? Their decision, made in the quiet of the workshop, was unanimous. "We will go," Lyra stated, the Heartstone warm against her chest. "We will help them, and we will learn from them." A living art cannot be kept in a cage. The delegation would be small. The three of them, their skills and instincts complementary. They would travel light, but their packs would hold the most precious of cargo. Alongside their bone chisels and simple provisions, they carefully wrapped copies of their foundational texts, the ethical codes and basic principles they had written together. These were not commands to be imposed, but offerings to be shared, the first threads of a tapestry they hoped to weave with strangers. As they prepared for the long climb into the mountains, the weight of the journey settled upon them. They were no longer just mending their own village. They were stepping onto a wider stage, becoming messengers and students in a world where the song of stone was only just beginning to be heard again. The mountain air was a knife in the lungs, and the narrow pass was a crumbling scar across the face of the peaks. Every step was a negotiation with loose shale and sheer drops. It was Finn, his eyes always drawn to the periphery, who first noticed the markers. They were not obvious, just simple pillars of stacked stone at each treacherous switchback, but each one was carved with a single, weathered rune. Lyra placed a hand on the cold rock and felt a faint, persistent hum, like a whisper from a sleeping guardian. "Guidance," she murmured, "and safety." These were not commands, but gentle suggestions woven into the stone itself, a subtle nudge to keep a traveler's footing sure and their path clear. The runes were so old, their power so drained, that they were on the verge of fading into mere legend. As a group, they paused at each marker. They did not carve new symbols or attempt a grand restoration. Instead, they placed their hands on the old stone and poured a trickle of reinforcing intent into the existing lines. A quiet thank you to the ancient crafters who had come this way before. The runes glowed briefly, a soft amber light that strengthened the helpful hum, ensuring the path would remain safe for whoever came next. This act of quiet stewardship was interrupted by a deep, groaning roar from the cliffs above. A wall of white death was racing toward them, a churning avalanche of snow and rock that filled the world with its thunder. There was no time for individual artistry. "Now, Kale," Lyra shouted, her voice cutting through the panic. "Anchor us." She did not take charge out of arrogance, but from a clear understanding of their strengths. The foreman dropped to one knee, his hands slamming onto the ground, his intent a fortress of unwavering stability. A shimmering, semi-circular wall of hardened air erupted before them, its surface buzzing with frantic energy. Lyra and Finn worked in tandem, their movements a frantic dance. They did not try to stop the unstoppable. Instead, they traced runes for deflection and flow onto the shield itself, their combined will acting like a plow, guiding the immense force of the snow to part around their small, sheltered pocket. The world became a roaring, white chaos, but their barrier held. When the thunder passed and the snow settled, they stood unharmed in a carved-out hollow, the pass behind them completely blocked. Their breath plumed in the sudden silence, their hearts hammering not just from fear, but from the shared exertion of a power that had just saved their lives. This was no longer about making flowers bloom or stones hum. This was raw, practical, life-saving magic, and its value was now undeniable. As they picked their way through the settling snow dust, the far side of the pass opened before them. Below, nestled in a deep valley cupped like a hand, lay the mountain village, and at its heart, a faint, sickly glow pulsed from what could only be the sacred spring, its light faltering like a dying heartbeat. The sacred spring was a dying heart in the center of the village. A circle of ancient, rune-carved stones rimmed the pool, but a deep crack had split one of them, and from that fracture, a thin skin of ice was slowly creeping across the water's surface. The amulet Reese carried glowed with a feverish, erratic light, a desperate struggle against an inevitable freeze. The entire village had gathered in a silent, anxious ring, their breath pluming in the air, their hope as fragile as the ice. An elder with a face as weathered as the mountain slopes stepped forward, his voice heavy with a grief held for generations. "The rune was set by our last runesmith," he explained, his gaze fixed on the failing light. "His name and his methods are lost to us. We have only known how to tend the amulet that channels its power. We are keepers of a flame we can no longer light." A low murmur of distrust rippled through the crowd. Their eyes were not on the cracking stone, but on Lyra and her companions, on their strange tools and unfamiliar ways. "You speak of collaboration," one woman called out, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "But what if your valley's song clashes with our mountain's hum? What if you break the balance entirely?" Their fear was a palpable wall. They saw salvation, but they also saw the risk of a final, catastrophic disruption. Lyra felt the weight of their suspicion, but she also felt the deeper truth in the stone. This was not a simple break to be patched. The old rune was exhausted, its intent stretched thin over too many years. Kneeling, she placed her palm against the cold, cracked rimstone. She did not feel a broken tool. She felt a tired guardian. "We will not repair the old rune," she announced, her voice clear and carrying over the anxious crowd. "We will thank it for its long service, and we will ask the spring to accept a new one, born from both our hands. It must be a joint carving, a symbol woven from your mountain's strength and our valley's flow." The stakes could not have been higher. Without the spring's warm water, the village would not survive the coming winter. Their livestock would perish, their crops would fail, and their community would scatter into the harsh peaks. But the greater loss would be one of trust. If they failed here, the first fragile thread connecting the two villages would snap, potentially souring any future contact into permanent suspicion. It was a test not just of skill, but of faith. Under the vast, crystalline dome of the night sky, the two groups prepared. The mountain runesmiths brought forth their own tools, hewn from dark, local obsidian, their techniques focused on endurance and resilience. Lyra, Kale, and Finn laid out their bone chisels and their principles of harmonic intent. There was no single leader, only a shared, focused purpose. As they began to mix their grinding stones and share their sharpening oils, the stars above seemed to pulse with a sudden, sharp clarity, their cold light intensifying as if the cosmos itself had leaned in to watch this fragile alliance take its first vital breath. The combined hum of the two villages swelled into a single, resonant chord that vibrated through the frozen ground. Under the full moon's stark light, their voices were not just sound, but substance, weaving a visible harmonic field of shimmering air around the sacred spring. An obsidian chisel, guided by a mountain smith's weathered hand, carved a line of deep, enduring strength. Then a bone chisel, held by Lyra, traced a path of fluid, graceful connection. They took turns, their tools and their traditions intertwining into one composite rune for enduring flow. The process was a physical and emotional trial, a delicate dance of wills where a single note of distrust, a single flicker of hesitation, would have shattered the entire fragile structure. The air crackled with the strain of synchronization, demanding absolute trust. As the final curve was completed, Lyra and the mountain elder moved as one, their hands young and old, valley-born and mountain-raised, settling onto the cool stone of the finished symbol. A profound silence held for a single, breathless heartbeat. Then the rune ignited. It did not simply glow, it sang. A deep, resonant tone erupted from the spring, and the thin ice shattered not with a crack, but with a sound like 1,000 crystal bells. The water did not just thaw, it surged upward, boiling over the rune-carved rim in a joyous, powerful geyser of clean, warm water that filled the air with a blanket of shimmering mist. The collaboration had not just fixed a problem, it had unlocked a potential no single tradition could have reached alone. As the warm mist settled over the stunned and celebrating villagers, something miraculous happened. For a few fleeting seconds, faint, intricate runes of connection and fellowship shimmered into being within the vapor itself, a spontaneous, silent blessing on their new pact before fading gently away. The warm mists of the mountain spring still clung to their cloaks as the delegation walked back into their own valley, but they were no longer three. Two mountain runecrafters, Anya and Gavril, walked with them, their eyes wide with a mixture of apprehension and wonder as they took in the transformed village square and the resonant hum of the quarry school. They carried with them not just packs, but a new lexicon of runes, techniques for coaxing water from stubborn rock and coaxing frost to retreat, born from generations of surviving in a harsher world. The school, once a circle of eager villagers, now had its first official students from beyond their borders. The trickle of new knowledge became a river, and with it came a new kind of pressure. The small clearing in the quarry was suddenly, overwhelmingly crowded. Seekers arrived weekly now, drawn by rumors of the singing spire and the school that had revived it. They came with their own fragments of lore, their own half-remembered songs, and their own desperate hopes. A once peaceful practice space now echoed with the competing hums of a dozen different regional styles, and the careful harmony they had cultivated threatened to dissolve into a cacophony of conflicting intentions. The sheer logistics of housing, feeding, and teaching, so many, became a constant, grinding concern. How could they preserve the intimate, collaborative spirit that was the heart of their craft when they were suddenly managing an institution? The answer came not from a single person, but from a shared, unspoken understanding that their informal family had to become something more structured. In a quiet ceremony beneath the weeping spire, now a beacon of steady, welcoming light, the school was formally established. Lyra, whose intuition had first rekindled the flame, was named headmistress. Kale, the guardian of discipline and technique, became the master crafter, and Finn, with his insatiable curiosity for forgotten texts and new applications, accepted the role of head of research. Together, they formed a council, a triad of leadership that balanced heart, hand, and mind. The weight of the title settled on Lyra's shoulders, a responsibility far heavier than any stone. She was no longer just a practitioner. She was a guide, a standard bearer. Every decision she made, every student they accepted, and every technique they endorsed would set a precedent, defining runecrafting for an entire generation. The school was now a living entity, and its actions would ripple across the region, either healing old wounds or creating new ones. Their first official act as a council was a declaration of their intent. "We will not hide our light," Lyra stated to the gathered students and villagers. "We will invite others to share it." They would plan a great gathering, a conclave of stones, and send word to every corner of the land they could reach. It was a bold, perhaps dangerous, invitation to a world still unsure if their art was a blessing or a curse. The first arrivals came from the salt marshes, their cloaks smelling of damp earth, and their runes carved into smooth, water-worn stones that hummed with the patience of deep, still pools. Next came the desert folk, their symbols etched into sun-baked clay tablets, their power a sharp, focused intensity for finding hidden water and cooling harsh winds. The Quarry School, once a quiet sanctuary, now echoed with the unfamiliar cadences of a dozen different dialects and the dissonant, overlapping hums of regional runes trying to find a common rhythm. For 3 days, the Conclave of Stones was a festival of shared wonder, a vibrant tapestry of survival. The marsh crafters demonstrated runes that could purify stagnant water, while the desert smiths showed how to weave symbols of cool shade into the very fabric of a tent. They shared stories passed down in secret, tales of grandmothers who hummed to the hearthstones, and uncles who could strengthen a cracking wall with a touch. Yet as the stories unfolded, a chilling pattern emerged. In every land, the art had not simply faded, it had been systematically hunted. The reason was always the same. An ancient, nameless empire had risen, an era when runes were twisted from their purpose of creation and bent to the will of conquest. The marsh folk spoke of great stones that called tsunamis to smash coastal cities. The desert people told of symbols that could turn a fertile oasis to dust in a day. The art was not feared for what it was, but for what ambitious hands had once forced it to become. This shared trauma now fractured the conclave. A crafter from the salt marshes, his face hardened by his people's history of being raided, stood and slammed his palm on the table. "We cannot be naive," he argued, his voice tight with a generations-old fear. "That empire is dust, but its example remains. If we do not develop runes of defense, of countermeasures, we leave our communities naked before any who might rediscover the old ways of war." Others nodded fiercely, their own histories of persecution written on their faces. "Why should we be the only ones to disarm? We need shields, not just plows." The air grew thick with the old, familiar poison of fear. Lyra watched, her heart aching. They were standing at the very precipice their ancestors had fallen from, ready to repeat the cycle out of the same terror that had originally destroyed the art. She stepped into the center of the tense circle, the Heartstone glowing softly in her hands. "We cannot build our future on the foundation of that fear," she said, her voice calm but carrying to every corner of the quarry. Let us not argue from stories. Let us see the truth together. She closed her eyes, and the Heartstone's light expanded, not as a force, but as an invitation. It pulled the collective consciousness of every crafter present into a shared vision. They did not see the Empire's glory, but its aftermath. They felt the searing pain of the earth as runes of fire scorched its surface. They saw the silent, permanent grief of forests, petrified into stone by misapplied power. They witnessed the moment a rune of connection was perverted into a tool of mental domination, and the psychic scream that shattered the crafter who wielded it. This was not a history lesson, it was an empathy. They felt as one the catastrophic dissonance that occurred when the art was turned against its own symbiotic nature. A desert crafter who had moments before advocated for shields let out a choked sob, feeling the phantom thirst of a land she had never seen. The vision shifted, showing them the gentle, resilient network of life, that runecrafting was meant to be a web of subtle supports, of quiet healings, of harmonious growth. The contrast was devastatingly clear. When the vision released them, a profound silence blanketed the conclave. The debate was over. The path of militarization, even in the name of defense, was a spiral that led only back to the silence of the Purge. The choice was not between strength and weakness, but between an art that served life and one that ultimately destroyed it. Unanimously, they forged the first accord of the conclave. Runecrafting would be dedicated to creation, healing, and the preservation of knowledge. They would become gardeners of the world's energy, not its generals. But as hands were joined in agreement, a new and more subtle challenge dawned. How would they, as a united body, define the line between a protective rune that sheltered a village from a landslide and a defensive rune that could be turned into a weapon? Their shared peace was secure, but the work of building a shared ethics had only just begun. The stone chosen for the accord was a vast, flat slab of deep gray granite, hauled from the very heart of the quarry, where Lyra had first listened for a song. It was placed at the center of the school, and under the open sky, the gathered masters began their work. This was not a carving of power, but of promise. Each crafter stepped forward, their chisels humming not with individual might, but with shared purpose. They did not write laws in a common tongue. Instead, they each inscribed a single, complex rune, a symbol that embodied their personal vow to the Accord's principles. A master from the marshes carved a rune for cleansing, a promise to purify intent. A desert smith etched a symbol for oasis, a vow to nurture community. Lyra added the final mark, a new rune she had dreamed of, one for enduring connection. As the last line was completed, a soft, silver light bloomed from the granite, weaving the individual symbols into a single, harmonious whole. The Accord Stone was no longer a record. It had become a source. A gentle, palpable field of serenity emanated from it, a quiet hum of unity that settled over the school like a blessing. To stand near it was to feel one's own anxieties quiet, to find a renewed clarity in the purpose of their shared craft. It was a living anchor for their hard-won peace. Yet, even within this powerful field of consensus, a pocket of resistance held firm. A crafter from a remote northern island, a man named Oren, whose runes were carved into sea ivory, watched the proceedings with a grim, unmoving silence. When it was his turn to approach the stone, he did not lift his chisel. "Our power is a trust, not a treaty," he stated, his voice like grinding ice. To bind it to the will of a council is to dilute its essence. Some truths are too potent to be shared with the world. He turned his back on the glowing stone and walked away, his departure a cold wind through the warm gathering. The conclave watched him go, a ripple of discomfort moving through the crowd. Here was the old fear, not of misuse, but of sharing itself. The instinct to hoard knowledge, to protect it behind walls of secrecy, was a powerful and understandable force. For a moment, the unity felt fragile, but Lyra, feeling the accord stone's steady pulse at her back, spoke for the council. "We will not force our fellowship on anyone," she said, her gaze following Orin's retreating form. "The path of secrecy is one he is free to walk, but our path is one of open hands and shared light. We will prove that our strength grows not by being hidden, but by being woven together." His dissent was a necessary reminder. It underscored that their unity was a choice, actively made every day, not a force that could simply be commanded into existence. It meant their work would always require vigilance, always require outreach, always require the patience to understand those who saw the world differently. As Orin vanished into the pass, a subtle but distinct pulse thrummed from the Heartstone against Lyra's chest. It was not a sound of alarm or completion, but a quiet, persistent note, like a reminder from the stone itself. The work of mending the world's fractured song was a continuous melody, not a single chord. Unification was a process, not a destination, and the departure of one voice only highlighted the countless others still waiting to be heard. The quartz walls of the sunken cave drank the light from Lyra's chisel, each stroke a whisper added to the chamber's eternal hum. Years had woven threads of silver into her hair, but the work before her was the most demanding of her life. This was no simple rune. It was the story of the art itself, a vast tapestry of loss and rebirth. She was carving directly into the living stone. The sheer scale of the history was a weight that settled deep into her bones, a final great labor that demanded every ounce of her endurance and skill. For weeks, she worked in near solitude, the rhythmic tap of her tool, the only sound beside the cave's own breath. Her shoulders ached with a fire that sleep could not quench, and her mind grew weary from holding so much memory at once. To inscribe a legacy was to live it all again, and the emotional toll was as profound as the physical one. She did not shy away from the painful chapters. With the same care she gave to the triumph of the Heartstone, she carved the image of her own despair in the archives, the terror of the cave-in, and the bitter sting of the village's rejection. She included Kale's long deception and Morwen's fearful opposition, not as villains, but as essential threads in the tapestry. She etched the debates and the doubts, the fractured Rune in the Quarry school, and Orin's descent at the conclave. An honest history, she knew, had to be human. It had to show the stumbles alongside the soaring victories, for it was in the moments of failure that the truest lessons were often found. This carving was her magnum opus, the ultimate fulfillment of the vow she had made as a young woman clutching a warm quartz shard. It was a promise to the past and a gift to the future, ensuring that no seeker who came after would ever have to feel as alone as she once had. The cave itself seemed to recognize the sanctity of the work. As she carved, the runes did not merely sit upon the surface. They sank into the quartz, becoming one with the stone, their light a soft, permanent glow that would never fade. She was not just writing on the walls, she was weaving their story back into the world's foundation. When at last she carved the final rune, a simple symbol for continuation, her hand trembled with exhaustion. As the line was completed, a wave of profound connection washed over her, so powerful it brought quiet tears to her eyes. She was not just a Lyra, the headmistress. In that moment, she felt the presence of every runecrafter who had ever lifted a tool. The ancient masters from the vision, Lyra with her hidden journal, her own grandmother humming a forbidden lullaby. She was a single note in a song that had begun long before her and would echo long after. The sunken cave was no longer a hidden secret or a test of worth. It had been transformed into a sacred library, its walls now a living chronicle that pulsed with a gentle, welcoming light. It stood ready for any pilgrim with a sincere heart, a sanctuary where the complete story of runecrafting, in all its flawed and beautiful humanity, was now eternally preserved. The final rune was carved, its light settling into the stone with the quiet certainty of a story well told. Lyra stood back, her body weary, but her spirit impossibly light. She reached into the pouch at her belt and withdrew the Heartstone. It pulsed warmly, a familiar rhythm that had been the beat of her own heart for so long. It had been her guide, her teacher, her secret strength, but she knew, with a clarity that felt like the cave's own breath, that its work with her was done. A true legacy could not be held in one person's hand. It had to be shared, to become as common and as essential as the air. She approached the simple quartz pedestal at the center of the chronicle wall, the very place she had first taken the stone. This was not an act of power, but of trust. She did not place the stone back upon the stand. She simply opened her hand and released it. The sphere hovered in the air, its light intensifying from a warm glow to a brilliant, sun-bright radiance. For a moment, it hung there, a miniature star in the heart of the earth. Then, with a sound like a gentle sigh of release, it dissolved. It did not shatter. It unfolded, blossoming into a silent shower of countless golden sparks that drifted through the cavern like luminous pollen. Each spark found a home, settling upon one of the thousands of runes carved into the walls. Where they landed, the symbols flared with a new, permanent light, no longer a reflection of a single source, but illuminated from within, a self-sustaining constellation of knowledge. The custodianship had passed. The art was no longer a secret to be protected, but a living language woven into the world, its care belonging to every heart and hand that sought it out. Lyra stood in the midst of that everlasting dawn, her hand now empty, yet feeling more full and more connected than she ever had when she held the stone. She had not lost her guide. She had become part of the very light it left behind. A gentle warmth pulsed from the cave walls, a greeting to the new arrivals. Lyra stood to the side, a quiet observer as a line of young apprentices filed past her, their wide eyes reflecting the soft, eternal glow of the runes. One girl, no older than Lyra had been in the quarry, trailed her fingers along the carved history, her touch light with reverence. She did not look afraid or confused. She looked like she was coming home. The art was no longer a secret to be hunted or a power to be hoarded. It had become as natural and essential as planting a seed or building a hearth, a vibrant thread woven into the very fabric of their community. The hum in the stones was now answered by the hum in their voices, a continuous, harmonious dialogue. She felt the truth of it then, a deep and settled peace. Her grandmother's lullaby, once a fragile, forbidden whisper, was now a chorus sung by many voices, its melody secure, its promise passed from one open heart to the next, forever.